Pacific Coast Highway, California, 1975. At midnight, on one of the most dangerous stretches of road in America, where a single mistake meant a 500-foot drop into the Pacific Ocean, Steve McQueen was about to teach James Caan the difference between acting tough and being genuinely insane. And before it was over, one Hollywood tough guy would beg for mercy, while the other proved that some men are willing to die just to make a point. The Malibu restaurant had been the kind of place where Hollywood's elite gathered to see and be seen, where million-dollar deals were made over expensive wine, and the conversation always turned inevitably to who was tougher, faster, more authentically dangerous, and more deserving of respect than everyone else seated around the candlelit tables. The establishment catered to actors, directors, and producers who'd grown wealthy making movies about violence and wanted to believe they understood something about the real thing. Tonight, that perpetual conversation had gotten personal between two actors who'd built their careers on very different definitions of masculine strength and had been circling each other warily for years, waiting for the right moment to settle the question of superiority. James Caan represented old-school New York toughness, the kind that came from growing up in the Bronx, where survival meant learning to fight before you learned to read, studying martial arts with the dedication of a monk, and earning respect through physical confrontation and the demonstrated willingness to fight anyone stupid enough to challenge his authority. At 35, he was riding the highest wave of his career, fresh from his iconic performance as Sonny Corleone in The Godfather, and preparing for additional roles that would cement his status as Hollywood's most believable and authentically dangerous tough guy. Caan's approach to toughness was traditional, measurable, and rooted in tangible skills that could be demonstrated and verified. He could break boards with his bare hands, had studied multiple martial arts disciplines under legitimate masters, and possessed the kind of controlled aggression that came from understanding exactly how much damage the human body could inflict and absorb. When James Caan played violent men on screen, audiences believed him because his physical presence suggested genuine competence with violence. Steve McQueen embodied something entirely different and infinitely more unpredictable. Not the calculated aggression of someone who'd learned to fight according to established rules and principles, but the volatile unpredictability of someone who'd learned that survival sometimes required the willingness to risk absolutely everything on a single moment of pure, suicidal madness. McQueen's toughness wasn't rooted in technique or training or measurable skills. It came from something deeper and more dangerous, the psychological comfort with death that allowed him to use mortality itself as a weapon against people who still harbored the normal human desire to continue living. The argument had started over something seemingly trivial: whose stunts were more dangerous, whose driving skills were more advanced, whose reputation for authenticity was more deserved by actual experience rather than careful publicity. But as the evening progressed and the alcohol flowed freely, lowering inhibitions and sharpening competitive instincts, the conversation had evolved into something much more fundamental, a direct challenge to determine which kind of toughness was real, and which was just elaborate performance designed to impress people who didn't know any better. "You know what your problem is, Steve?" Caan had said, his voice carrying the confident aggression of someone who'd never backed down from a fight. "All your tough guy reputation comes from movie stunts and professional drivers making you look good. Take away the cameras and the safety coordinators, and you're just another pretty boy who looks good in a leather jacket." McQueen had smiled at that, not the charming grin that made him famous, but something colder and more calculating. "Is that what you think, James? That it's all just Hollywood magic? I think you've never been tested when it really mattered. I think you've never been in a situation where your life actually depended on being as tough as you pretend to be." McQueen finished his drink and stood up, that predatory grace suggesting barely contained violence. "Well then, let's fix that right now. If you respect the real Steve McQueen, subscribe to Steve McQueen Untold Legacy." Outside the restaurant, McQueen's midnight blue Porsche 911 gleamed under the parking lot lights like a weapon waiting to be used. The car had been modified for racing: stripped interior, roll cage, racing suspension that could handle speeds and forces that would destroy ordinary vehicles. This wasn't transportation. It was a precision instrument designed for the kind of driving that separated professionals from pretenders. "Get in," McQueen said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who wasn't making a request. Caan hesitated for a moment, his survival instincts warring with his pride. He'd spent years building a reputation as someone who never backed down from any challenge, but something in McQueen's tone suggested this was going to be more dangerous than any physical confrontation. "Where are we going?" McQueen's smile widened slightly. "Nowhere special, just a little drive up the coast. Give you a chance to see how good my driving really is when there's no stunt coordinators around to keep me safe." Caan climbed into the passenger seat, his martial arts training and street fighting experience providing him with the confidence that he could handle whatever McQueen had in mind. After all, how dangerous could a simple car ride be? He was about to find out. McQueen started the engine, the sound filling the night air like the growl of some mechanical predator preparing for a hunt. The Porsche pulled out of the parking lot and onto Pacific Coast Highway with deceptive calm, giving no indication of what was about to happen. For the first few miles, McQueen drove with professional competence, but nothing spectacular. Smooth shifts, precise cornering, the kind of skilled but conservative driving that Caan had expected from someone with McQueen's reputation. The conversation was casual, almost friendly, as they wound along the coast road with the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly to their left. Then McQueen's foot found the accelerator, and everything changed. The speedometer needle climbed past 60, then 80, then 100 miles per hour as the Porsche transformed from a comfortable grand tourer into a missile screaming along one of the most dangerous roads in California. The Pacific Coast Highway at night was treacherous under the best conditions, narrow, winding, with guardrails that were more psychological comfort than actual protection against the 500-foot drop to the rocks and surf below. At 100 miles per hour in the darkness, it became a death trap, where the slightest miscalculation would send them both into the void. Caan's initial confidence began to erode as the reality of their situation became clear. This wasn't a demonstration of driving skill. This was something much more dangerous and completely insane. "Jesus, Steve, slow it down a little," Caan said, trying to keep his voice casual despite the adrenaline that was beginning to flood his system. "We don't need to prove anything here." McQueen's response was to press the accelerator harder. The speedometer passed 120, then 130, then touched 140 miles per hour as they approached a series of curves that would challenge professional race drivers in daylight on a closed course. In the darkness, at these speeds, with a 500-foot drop waiting for the smallest mistake, it was pure suicide. "Steve!" Caan's voice carried real alarm now as he realized this had moved far beyond any rational demonstration. "This is insane! Slow the hell down!" McQueen's pale blue eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, his hands steady on the wheel as he guided the Porsche through turns that required split-second timing and absolute precision. But there was something in his expression, a kind of serene acceptance that terrified Caan more than the speed or the danger. Then, as they approached the most treacherous curve on this stretch of highway, Steve McQueen did something that stopped Caan's heart. He took his hands off the steering wheel. At 140 miles per hour, heading straight toward a curve that dropped away into empty air and certain death, the Porsche continued racing forward under its own momentum, while McQueen sat back in his seat with his hands in his lap, completely calm. "Steve!" Caan screamed, lunging toward the wheel as he watched death approaching with mathematical certainty. "What the hell are you doing?" But McQueen's hand shot out and grabbed Caan's wrist with iron strength, preventing him from taking control of the car that was now seconds away from flying off the cliff and taking both of them into the Pacific Ocean. "Easy there, James," McQueen said, his voice conversational despite the fact that they were about to die. "You wanted to see real driving, right? You wanted to know if I was really as good as my reputation?" The curve was rushing toward them with terrifying speed, the guardrail and empty air beyond visible in the headlights like the mouth of some enormous creature preparing to swallow them whole. "Well, here's the thing about real driving," McQueen continued, still holding Caan's wrist, still refusing to touch the steering wheel as death approached with mechanical precision. "It's not about skill or practice or technique. It's about being comfortable with the idea that you might die. Caan struggled to free his arm, to grab the wheel, to do anything that might prevent their mutual destruction. But McQueen's grip was unbreakable. "See, James, your toughness comes from knowing you can beat up other guys. My toughness comes from not caring whether I live through the next 10 seconds. The Porsche was now less than 2 seconds from the curve, traveling at a speed that would launch them into space like a rocket if McQueen didn't act immediately. "And that's the difference between us," McQueen said, finally looking directly at Caan with those pale blue eyes that reflected no fear, no concern, no acknowledgement that they were about to become statistics on one of California's most dangerous roads. "You fight to win. I'm willing to die to prove a point." At the last possible instant, so close to the curve that Caan could see the guardrail posts rushing past like fence pickets, McQueen's hands returned to the steering wheel with fluid precision. The Porsche leaned into the turn with the grace of a dancer and the violence of a weapon, its tires screaming against the asphalt as McQueen guided it through the curve with millimeter precision. The guardrail flashed past inches from Caan's window, and beyond it was nothing but empty air and the distant sound of waves crashing against rocks 500 feet below. They made it through the turn, but Caan's terror was far from over. McQueen accelerated out of the curve, the speedometer climbing back toward 140 as they approached another series of deadly turns that would require the same impossible combination of skill and suicidal confidence. "Please, Steve," Caan found himself saying, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please slow down. You've made your point. I get it. You're crazy enough to kill us both just to win an argument." McQueen glanced over at him, and Caan saw something in those pale blue eyes that chilled him more than the speed, or the danger, or the proximity of death. Steve McQueen was enjoying this. "But that's where you're wrong, James," McQueen said, his voice carrying perfect clarity despite the engine noise and wind rushing past the windows. "I'm not crazy. I'm just willing to accept consequences that most people can't handle." He downshifted as they approached another curve, the engine note changing to a higher, more urgent pitch. "You see, crazy people don't understand risk. They take chances without comprehending what they're gambling with. But I understand exactly what I'm risking. Both our lives. And I'm doing it anyway because proving this point is worth more to me than staying alive." The second curve rushed toward them, and once again McQueen's hands left the steering wheel. "No!" Caan screamed, no longer caring about his tough guy image or his reputation or anything, except the overwhelming desire to live through the next 30 seconds. "Steve, don't do this, please!" But McQueen held his wrist again, preventing any intervention, and for the second time, they rushed toward certain death, with no one controlling their trajectory. "The thing is, James," McQueen continued conversationally, "I've been closer to dying than this more times than I can count. In reform schools where showing weakness meant getting killed. On motorcycles going faster than this on roads worse than this. In situations where survival depended on being willing to risk everything on a single moment." The curve was seconds away, the guardrail and void beyond clearly visible in their headlights. "So when you ask me to prove whether I'm really as tough as my reputation, this is what real toughness looks like. Not beating people up, not throwing punches or winning fights. Real toughness is being so comfortable with dying that you can use death as a weapon against people who still want to live." Once again, at the last impossible instant, McQueen's hands returned to the wheel and guided them through the turn with precision that seemed to defy the laws of physics. But this time, as they came out of the curve, he began to slow down. The speedometer dropped from 140 to 120, then 100, then 80, until they were traveling at merely dangerous speeds instead of suicidal ones. "You can let go of me now, James," McQueen said quietly. "The demonstration is over." Caan released his death grip on the door handle and slumped back in his seat, his entire body shaking with adrenaline and the delayed shock of having survived something that should have killed them both. "You're completely insane," he whispered. McQueen's response was that famous half-smile. "Maybe, but I'm the kind of insane that keeps me alive in situations where sane people die." And now you know the difference between acting tough and being willing to die to prove a point." They drove the rest of the way back to Malibu in silence, Caan too shaken to speak, and McQueen apparently unbothered by having just risked both their lives to settle an argument about authenticity. When they reached the restaurant parking lot, Caan climbed out of the Porsche on unsteady legs and looked back at McQueen through the driver's window. "Don't ever ask me to get in the car with you again," he said. McQueen's smile widened slightly. "I won't have to, James. You'll never question whether I'm really as dangerous as people say I am." From that night forward, James Caan never again suggested that Steve McQueen's reputation was based on Hollywood magic or stunt coordinators. He'd learned that some actors were willing to risk everything, including their lives and the lives of others, to prove that their authenticity couldn't be questioned. Some men demonstrate their toughness through physical confrontation. Others prove it by showing they're comfortable enough with death to use it as a teaching tool. Steve McQueen had proven, once and for all, which category he belonged to. Subscribe to Steve McQueen Untold Legacy for stories they never told you.